1. There is considerable debate over how we should react if we detect a signal from an alien civilization. 2. The 2 world wars, which interrupted the supply of raw material from Japan, also stifled the European silk industry. 3. Migration is a complex issue, and biologists define it differently, depending in part on what sorts of animals they study. 4. One way is by organizing backstage tours, so people can be shown round the building and learn how a theatre operates. 5. What I'm afraid will happen is that books and magazines will all disappear, and there'll just be rows and rows of computers. 6. The psychological laboratory has a strong claim to legitimacy and evokes trust and confidence in those who perform there. 7. The displays of art museums serve as a warning of what critical practices can emerge when spontaneous criticism is suppressed. 8. Vertical farming is an attempt to address the undoubted problems that we face in producing enough food for a growing population. 9. It was not until 1500 BC, however, that the first hollow glass container was made by covering a sand core with a layer of molten glass. 10. Many theorists believe the ideal boss should lead from behind, taking pride in collective accomplishment and giving credit where it is due. 11. Though we might think of film as an essentially visual experience, we really cannot afford to underestimate the importance of film sound. 12. As far as goods transport is concerned, growth is due to a large extent to changes in the European economy and its system of production. 13. In order to track temporal hours during the day, inventors created sundials, which indicate time by the length or direction of the sun's shadow. 14. Lee Hall's analysis of figures, comparing the times of the fires and the proportion of seed that germinated, was done in a lot of detail, very impressive. 15. While the Inuit may not actually starve if hunting and trapping are curtailed by climate change, there has certainly been an impact on people's health. 16. It would seem that the brain sees these images as puzzles, and the harder it is to decipher the meaning, the more rewarding is the moment of recognition. 17. Such material, even where it appears comparatively trivial, can have a serious effect on the company, supplier, or customer if it falls into the wrong hands. 18. If the glass were kept hot enough, it would flow over the molten tin until the top surface was also flat, horizontal, and perfectly parallel to the bottom surface. 19. It was once assumed that improvements in telecommunications would lead to more dispersal in the population, as people were no longer forced into cities. 20. Compared to language, all other inventions pale in significance, since everything we have ever achieved depends on language and originates from it. 21. It's true there are new regulations for mercury emissions from power plants, but these will need billions of dollars to implement and increase costs for everyone. 22. The teacher's task is to assist the students to apply what they have learned paraconsciously, and in doing so to make it easily accessible to consciousness. 23. However, if one of the parties in a conflict sees human resources as simply a mouthpiece for the chief executive, then an external mediator might be able to help. 24. Summer leaves are green because they are full of chlorophyll, the molecule that captures sunlight and converts that energy into new building materials for the tree. 25. If clothing fails to meet these standards, as determined by the employee's supervisor, the employee will be asked not to wear the inappropriate item to work again. 26. The participants weren't told beforehand whether the tunes were composed by humans or computers, but were asked to guess, and then rate how much they liked each one. 27. If identical twins are more similar to each other with respect to an ailment than fraternal twins are, then vulnerability to the disease must be rooted at least in part in heredity. 28. Finally, perhaps the most graphic expressions of self-awareness in general can be seen in the displays of rage which are most common from 18 months to 3 years of age. 29. If we can understand how geography affects our health, no matter where in the world we are located, we can better treat disease, prevent illness, and keep people safe and well. 30. Similarly, people who collect dolls may go beyond simply enlarging their collection and develop an interest in the way that dolls are made or the materials that are used. 31. He wanted to give people a feeling of suspense as they see the building first from a distance and then close up, and the shape of the building as a whole was that of a box. 32. The reason often given for the low regard in which smell is held is that, in comparison with its importance among animals, the human sense of smell is feeble and undeveloped. 33. Some of you suggested an Italian restaurant, but I must confess that I decided to book a Lebanese one, as we have plenty of opportunities to go to an Italian restaurant at home. 34. As these ancestral tortoises settled on the individual islands, the different populations adapted to their unique environments, giving rise to at least 14 different subspecies. 35. The continuous and reckless use of synthetic chemicals for the control of pests which pose a threat to agricultural crops and human health is proving to be counterproductive. 36. Both social and cognitive types of laughter tap into the same expressive machinery in our brains, the emotion and motor circuits that produce smiles and excited vocalizations. 37. Opinion polls suggest that many people nurture the belief that environmental standards are declining, and 4 factors seem to cause this disjunction between perception and reality. 38. Natural soil fertility is dropping in many areas because of continuous industrial fertilizer and pesticide use, while the growth of algae is increasing in lakes because of the fertilizer runoff. 39. Within the span of several centuries, the Lapita stretched the boundaries of their world from the jungle-clad volcanoes of Papua New Guinea to the loneliest coral outliers of Tonga. 40. Multi-plan insurance may not cover all pre-existing medical conditions, so before you leave, be sure to check with them about any long-term illnesses or disabilities that you have. 41. As the medical world continues to grapple with what's acceptable and what's not, it is clear that companies must continue to be heavily scrutinized for their sales and marketing strategies. 42. The reasoning is that if you replenish the ice sheets and frozen waters of the high latitudes, more light will be reflected back into space, so reducing the warming of oceans and atmosphere. 43. A final theory is related to group behavior and suggests that sea mammals cannot distinguish between sick and healthy leaders and will follow sick leaders even to an inevitable death. 44. From earliest childhood, we are so bound up with our system of numeration that it is a fear of imagination to consider the problems faced by early humans who had not yet developed this facility. 45. One of my purposes in writing this book is to give readers who haven't had the opportunity to see and enjoy real mathematics the chance to appreciate the mathematical way of thinking. 46. We have also negotiated a range of benefits for staff, such as discounted private healthcare and a car purchase scheme, along with a number of one-off deals with hotels and amusement parks. 47. For many enthusiasts, the ultimate flight fantasy is the jetpack, a small piece of equipment on your back which enables you to climb vertically into the air and fly forwards, backwards, and turn. 48. The typical way of talking to a baby, high-pitched, exaggerated, and repetitious, is a source of fascination for linguists who hope to understand how baby talk impacts on learning. 49. Psychologists have long held that a person's character cannot undergo a transformation in any meaningful way and that the key traits of personality are determined at a very young age. 50. It was only when the hull was hanging freely from the lifting frame, clear of the seabed and the suction effect of the surrounding mud, that the salvage operation progressed to the second stage. 51. They think the population of Rapa Nui grew rapidly and then remained more or less stable until the arrival of the Europeans, who introduced deadly diseases to which islanders had no immunity. 52. Anyway, even though these noise maps are fairly crude, they've been useful in providing information and raising awareness that noise matters. We need to deal with it, and so it's a political matter. 53. Travel has existed since the beginning of time, when primitive man set out, often traversing great distances in search of game, which provided the food and clothing necessary for his survival. 54. This is why composers often introduce a key note in the beginning of a song, spend most of the rest of the piece in the studious avoidance of the pattern, and then finally repeat it only at the end. 55. In its most general sense, prescriptivism is the view that one variety of language has an inherently higher value than others, and that this ought to be imposed on the whole of the speech community. 56. What we've decided to present today is information about just 3 species, because we felt these gave a good indication of the processes at work in rural and urban settings as a whole. 57. The results of a 14-year study to be announced later this month reveal that the diseases associated with old age are afflicting fewer and fewer people, and when they do strike, it is much later in life. 58. Memory consolidation, the next step in forming an episodic memory, is the process by which memories of encoded information are strengthened, stabilized, and stored to facilitate later retrieval. 59. In the course of conducting research in a number of industries and working directly with companies, we have discovered that managers often fail to recognize the less obvious but profound ways these trends are influencing consumers' aspirations, attitudes, and behaviors. 60. The conviction that historical relics provide infallible testimony about the past is rooted in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when science was regarded as objective and value-free. 61. After this, many researchers switched to Otto-Garnsfeld tests, an automated variant of the technique which used computers to perform many of the key tasks, such as the random selection of images. 62. Unless there are no purchase facilities available at the station where you began your journey, you will be required to pay the full fare if you are unable to produce a valid ticket for inspection during a journey. 63. Although population, industrial output, and economic productivity have continued to soar in developed nations, the rate at which people withdraw water from aquifers, rivers, and lakes has slowed. 64. High achievers have been found to use self-regulatory learning strategies more often and more effectively than low achievers, and are better able to transfer these strategies to deal with unfamiliar tasks. 65. Research also indicates that bilingual experience may help to keep the cognitive mechanisms sharp by recruiting alternate brain networks to compensate for those that become damaged during aging. 66. Not only was a monopoly of cinnamon becoming impossible, but the spice trade overall was diminishing in economic potential and was eventually superseded by the rise of trade in coffee, tea, chocolate, and sugar. 67. Another feature that attracted a lot of attention was an interactive journey through a number of the locations chosen for blockbuster films, which had made use of New Zealand's stunning scenery as a backdrop. 68. As researchers on aging noted recently, no treatment on the market today has been proved to slow human aging. The build-up of molecular and cellular damage that increase vulnerability to infirmity as we grow older. 69. We tend to think of climate, as opposed to weather, as something unchanging, yet humanity has been at the mercy of climate change for its entire existence, with at least 8 glacial episodes in the past 730,000 years. 70. In common with all mammals, reptiles, and birds, the remote ancestors of tortoises were marine fish, and before that, various more or less worm-like creatures stretching back, still in the sea, to the primeval bacteria. 71. It is finished manufactured products that dominate the flow of trade. And, thanks to technological advances such as lightweight components, manufactured goods themselves have tended to become lighter and less bulky. 72. It's true that the actual construction of the house was harmful to the environment, mainly because they had to use massive amounts of concrete, one of the biggest sources of carbon dioxide in manufacturing. 73. The difficulty with the evidence produced by these studies, fascinating as they are in collecting together anecdotes and apparent similarities and exceptions, is that they are not what we would today call norm-referenced. 74. Businesses are finding that ethnography can offer them deeper insight into the possible needs of customers, either present or future, as well as providing valuable information about their attitudes towards existing products. 75. Education is a hiring requirement for 60% of employment opportunities, but 40% of human resources staff say that if they do not know a lot about the value of documents attained elsewhere, they will not recognize them. 76. The impression is that the logical nature of the textbooks and their comprehensive coverage of different types of examples, combined with the relative homogeneity of the class, renders worksheets unnecessary. 77. Most tickets may be used for travel by sleeper, subject to availability, and a reservation in a 2-berth cabin can be made for £25, except in the case of solo and special tickets, which include sleeper reservations in the fare. 78. Operating on the same principle as wind turbines, the power in sea turbines comes from tidal currents, which turn blades similar to ships' propellers. But unlike wind, the tides are predictable and the power input is constant. 79. These discoveries have led to the field known as neuroeconomics, which studies the brain's secrets to success in an economic environment that demands innovation and being able to do things differently from competitors. 80. While the detrimental effects of noise in classroom situations are not limited to children experiencing disability, those with a disability that affects their processing of speech and verbal communication could be extremely vulnerable. 81. By timing the transit from two widely separated locations, teams of astronomers could calculate the parallax angle, the apparent difference in position of an astronomical body due to a difference in the observer's position. 82. Victimized pupils are more likely to experience difficulties with interpersonal relationships as adults, while children who persistently bully are more likely to grow up to be physically violent and convicted of antisocial offenses. 83. On the negative side, this type of organization doesn't always act effectively, because it depends too much on one or two people at the top, and when these people make poor decisions, there's no one else who can influence them. 84. Researchers from 9 countries are working together to create a map linked to a database that can be fed measurements from field surveys, drone surveys, satellite imagery, lab analyses, and so on to provide real-time data on the state of soil. 85. As the fire continued to rage, the National Trust's conservators were being mobilized, and that evening, local stationers were especially opened to provide the bulk supplies of blotting paper so desperately needed in the salvage operation. 86. Her contribution to physics had been immense, not only in her own work, the importance of which had been demonstrated by her 2 Nobel Prizes, but because of her influence on subsequent generations of nuclear physicists and chemists. 87. The taxonomist sometimes overlooks whole species in favor of those groups currently under study, while the ecologist often collects only a limited number of specimens of each species, thus reducing their value for taxonomic investigations. 88. Many CEOs combine 2 opposing characteristics: confidence, that is, the belief that they're capable of great achievements, with a high level of anxiety, a fear of missing targets, whether set by themselves or by the directors of the company. 89. A radical solution, which may work for some very large companies whose businesses are extensive and complex, is the professional board, whose members would work up to 3 or 4 days a week, supported by their own dedicated staff and advisors. 90. This approach is summarized in the statement that it is the task of the grammarian to describe, not to prescribe, to record the facts of linguistic diversity, and not to attempt the impossible tasks of evaluating language variation or halting language change. 91. Some recent interdisciplinary research has come out with results that at first sight seem contradictory. A city needs to have a sense of activity, so it needs to be lively, with sounds like the clack of high heels on a pavement or the hiss of a coffee machine. But these mustn't be too intrusive, because at the same time we need to be able to relax. 92. Another strange feature of the Japanese pagoda is that, because the building tapers, with each successive floor plan being smaller than the one below, none of the vertical pillars that carry the weight of the building is connected to its corresponding pillar above. 93. An accident that occurred in the skies over the Grand Canyon in 1956 resulted in the establishment of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, to regulate and oversee the operation of aircraft in the skies over the United States, which were becoming quite congested. 94. Tourists flock to wells in far-flung corners of northwestern India to gaze in wonder at these architectural marvels from hundreds of years ago, which serve as a reminder of both the ingenuity and artistry of ancient civilizations, and of the value of water to human existence. 95. The antiseptic properties of tannin, the active ingredient in tea, and of hops in beer, plus the fact that both are made with boiled water, allowed urban communities to flourish at close quarters without succumbing to waterborne diseases such as dysentery. 96. As recently as 1993, engineers made a major breakthrough by discovering so-called turbo codes, which come very close to Shannon's ultimate limit for the maximum rate that data can be transmitted reliably, and now play a key role in the mobile video phone revolution. 97. If a lifespan is a genetically determined biological characteristic, it is logically necessary to propose the existence of an internal clock, which in some way measures and controls the aging process, and which finally determines death as the last step in a fixed program. 98. Participants in the online debate argued that our biggest challenge is to address the underlying causes of the agricultural system's inability to ensure inability food for all, and they identified as drivers of this problem our dependency on fossil fuels and unsupportive government policies. 99. Already in laboratory trials, they have tested strategies for neutralizing the power of thunderstorms, and this winter they will brave real storms, equipped with an armory of lasers that they will be pointing towards the heavens to discharge thunderclouds before lightning can strike. 100. Eliminating the secrecy surrounding pay by openly communicating everyone's remuneration, publicizing performance bonuses, and allocating annual salary increases in a lump sum, rather than spreading them out over an entire year, are examples of actions that will make rewards more visible and potentially more motivating.